And without further ado, the delightful Mary Lee Sachs. Thank you.
Thank you. So let me first introduce my panelists as soon as I can figure out how to put this back where it was. Right, to my left, I have Allison Arden of Ad Age and Creativity, who has written The Book of Doing. Want to wave it around?
Sure.
Good promotion.
Yep.
Next to her is Paul Lavoie, who's chairman and co-founder of Taxi and has written the book Doubt. Very obvious what that's about. Next to Paul is Scott Goodson, who's chairman of Strawberry Frog, who's written Uprising, and I saw copies of it in the back, so I think they're available if people want to buy them. And next to Scott is Baratunde Thurston, who has written the book How to Be Black. He was previously with The Onion.
Looks like me.
There you go. Now, I don't know if you guys are even familiar with the film, the original film, Author, but it was exactly 30 years ago this year. And it was a very different sort of author type of experience because it was about a playwright. So 30 years on, you've got nonfiction writers up here. And before we kick off with questions for the panel, I'd like to ask all of you if any of you are budding authors. Has anybody else written a book here? Got one in the back? What have you written?
It's a young adult fantasy that just got published last month called The Long Story.
Congratulations. Well done. And are there any budding authors in the audience or people that would really like to write a book? No? One. Okay, well, we've got one other. All right, well, then why are you all here? Okay, well, we'll start off. I would like to hear from the panelists how they got the idea for the book and what kind of inspired them to write the book. And I'll start off with Allison first.
Sure. Let's make sure you can hear me. So I, like most of you, did not think I had a book in me, never actually set out to write a book. As the kind of full-time working mother of 2 young children, I found myself running so fast that I wasn't spending any time enjoying any of it. And the decision I made was to actually just spend my time figuring out what were the things that made me happy, what was I doing when I was happiest, and trying to figure out how to find my center and joy in the midst of doing all of these things, right? It was like living the dream, just didn't look this harried in the dream. So started thinking about what made me happy and realized that much of my joy when I was at my happiest, I was doing arts and crafts when I was a kid. Thought about where did my creativity come from? So when I was doing arts and crafts, found that I was happiest, I thought, what if I treated everything around me as if it was an arts and crafts project with that same delight, that same kind of fearlessness, that same sense of possibility, the same sense of what I could make of something. Did that for about 2 years and just had the best time. Ultimately woke up with these words in my head, which made me realize that my favorite arts and crafts project was actually a metaphor for this kind of unraveling that I had been doing of myself. That was about 4:30 in the morning. By about 8 o'clock that morning, I had a 10-chapter outline written. And from there, I just started writing. About 4 months later, I realized I had enough material to bring me to an agent, which led me to 7 publishing companies, about 6 lovely rejections, and 1 publisher within Penguin who liked what I had written but didn't do the kind of book I had done, and ultimately reconceived a different book for them, which was based on all the activities that I had done to get me to the point of writing a book. And so it's like a fully illustrated kids book for adults to help us let our inner child out and start approaching the world with possibility.
It's very cool, and everybody should think about getting a copy for their mother for Mother's Day.
Thank you.
We're going to talk about publishers, because I know some of you are self-published and some of you are published, so I want to come on to that separately. But where did you get your inspiration, Paul?
Hello. Well, the book is called Doubt. It's really sort of the foundation of our culture at Taxi. It's a way of thinking and thinking differently and unconventionally, and it's really informed the way we've solved problems over the history of our company. And this book was written not for the public, although it is sold out. It was written for the people that work at Taxi, a little under 500 people. And it came out appropriately when we made the sale. We sold our agency to WPP. And again, it was very important for us with this sale to accept the fact that we had sold the company, but not the culture. And this book, again, just really, for all of us at Taxi, it just reinforces what we believe in, what makes us different, and and from there, as long as we have that in play, I think we'll be successful. So that was the reason why we brought it out, and at that time.
Great. Scott, what about your book?
Well, I have the fortune of working with very smart people at Strawberry Frog, and we focus on building movements for brands, and Ula, who's the strategic lead, and Kevin runs the creative. We've tried to build movements with clients. And I wanted to put that on paper and get that into a book. And as I started doing that, the world just exploded into a huge uprising. So this whole idea that you can motivate people who are very restless, who want to be participating in a brand, and give them an idea that they're already passionate about, and sort of corral them and give them a whole culture they can participate in. Just kind of started happening everywhere around the world. I mean, it started in, obviously, Tunisia, but it ended up, 15 meters from our office in Manhattan with Wall Street, and I was in London, and even in Canada, there was a woman who was raped, and the police officer said she looked like a slut, so there was the slut walk that just exploded across the world, So it was happening everywhere. Yeah. And so the book really looks at it from a brand marketing perspective, but also looks at it as a social phenomenon. And that is really what the book's about.
Okay.
Yeah.
Baratunde, where'd you get yours or inspiration from?
I was, I got the inspiration. I was born black, and that helped. Been kind of an expert. But it started when I tried to buy some wine in Park Slope. And I went to the shop, and there's a certain way you're supposed to buy wine. It's supposed to smell and evoke feelings and nuance and nutmeg and all this kind of stuff. And I didn't know how to do that. And I didn't want to ask the cashier for help because I wasn't interested in bettering myself. So I just judged the wine by its label, and I saw this label said Negro Amaro. I was like, that's perfect. That's a wine for discerning Negroes who are also idiots, which just perfectly described me in that time. So I bought the wine. I went to Twitter later. I live online. I've been blogging for a long time. And I challenged my friend Elon James White, who is another comedian, lives in Brooklyn. I said, look, I bought this bottle of wine because it had the word Negro in it. How black are you? And then he responded, talking about how racist Thundercats was, how black are you? We went back and forth with this hashtag, how black are you? And it became a multi-day game that hundreds of other people joined in on. I ended up talking at a conference about this later, about the magic of hashtags and actually the movements. I talked about politics, I talked about comedy, I talked about creativity. And in the audience was a publisher, was a woman named Debbie Steer, who worked at Harper Studio. And they brought me in for a meeting and said, we like your voice, you should maybe write a book called How Black Are You? And I said, no, I should not. That is a terrible, irresponsible thing to do. I don't really trust this country with that label. But what came out of that meeting was how to be black. And it dovetailed with a lot of the rest of my life, obviously not just being black, but we're being in this moment of trying to expand the realm and the possibilities of blackness. We got kind of a half-black / black president, and the spokesmodels and persons who are typically gone to represent blackness, that's done. We're in a peer-to-peer, ground-up kind of world. So this is an opportunity to be comedic, but also highly personal and satirical at the same time, and sort of play with the subject that makes people very uncomfortable and very defensive and very afraid, and sort of calm them down a bit with some humor, but also sneak in some jabs.
Right.
Yeah.
You kind of gasped when Allison said she'd had 10 chapters down in a couple of hours. How long did it take you to outline the book, or did you even outline, or did you go straight to writing it?
So here's what happened. We had this conversation in December of 2009, March of 2010. We actually signed the paperwork that says, you have a book deal. And I was like, yay, what does this mean? Nice, I check. I like checks, especially when they clear. My deadline was ridiculous. It was September of 2010 for a book that was supposed to come out in February 2011. I wanted Black History Month, ride the wave of blackness. Why be stupid? I missed that deadline. That was not, and I thought I'd write over the summer. It was very nice outside. I underestimated what book writing was. I'm like, I'm a blogger. I can just blog hard. It is not the same at all. It is not like a lot of tweets piled together. It's a whole nother thing. My editor ended up getting fired, and that was dramatic and threw a wrinkle in time. So I ended up, honestly, I wrote the book over 2 summers. The first summer, I tried to write the book, and I failed. The second summer, I got serious, I isolated myself, and I banged this book out, I'd say over 5 to 6 week period.
Wow,
Yeah.
that's fast.
Because I knew what I was, but again, I wouldn't have been, it was the first process, like the lack of respect I had for book writing versus other forms of expression. I'm very comfortable talking into a microphone, I've done the stand-up thing. It's just, it's a different level of discipline that I didn't honor, I think,
Right.
the first time around. Yeah.
Yep, okay. Scott, how about you? How long did it take you to write your book?
A lifetime.
I just felt
No,
like a lifetime.
It felt like a lifetime. I think by the time when I first present, I mean, you write the prospectus, so you do the first chapter, and then you write sort of 10, 12 chapters or so. And then I have a very good agent who managed to get several publishers interested, and they do an auction on what's the best one. And once we agreed on a publisher, we did the agreement, and then I think it took about perhaps 6 months
Right, right.
for me to finish the book.
Yeah.
I mean, finished manuscript.
Right.
Yeah.
And Paul, you had a bit of a deadline with the WPP acquisition, I'm guessing.
Well, first of all, it was a group effort.
Right.
It wasn't, people say it's my book. It was maybe my philosophy, but it was put together by a lot of different people, a lot of designers and writers at Taxi. We also, part of the book is philosophical. It really shares stories of people who have really doubted convention, not in the traditional marketing sense of the word, but have made really big contributions to our life and made our lives bigger. And these are great stories. And then the other part of the book are more practical sort of advice on how to get through that. Because when you want to doubt, when you want to really challenge convention, you really have to be, first of all, a cynic. You have to, not agree, and you have to question. But to actually get a great idea through the system, even advertising, we talked about it this morning, you really need to be an optimist, because it can be a challenge to get a new idea through the system. Conventional ideas are easier to sell than non-conventional ideas. So we found stories, and the whole agency contributed. We picked the best stories. So, it was a group effort, and it took about, 6 months. I may be wrong. I don't even remember. But it seemed longer than that.
Yeah.
Maybe more like 5 years. But yeah, it was probably about 5 years.
Figuratively speaking.
We can do things for our clients, but when we do things for ourselves, it's like, especially, we never put a docket up, and we never really, so we kept chipping at it.
Well, one of the problems is the real work gets in the way.
Oh, right, there's that.
There is that.
There's that.
Allison, how long did it take you to put everything together? The outline came very quickly, but what about the rest of
Well,
it?
that was the first book, which is not the book that actually got
Oh,
published.
okay.
So the book that Penguin bought it took about 6 months, but I needed to find an illustrator who could bring it to life, because the book is fully illustrated. 94 activities that are fully illustrated that I spent a number of hours after a couple of weeks of agonizing over where am I going to find the perfect designer, went searching for somebody who could do hand-drawn illustration, found him in Australia.
Wow.
I sent what I call an email in a bottle across the sea and heard back within 24 hours. He totally understood the vision, wanted to bring it to life for me. And I loved that he was a guy and not a woman, because it could have easily skewed very female. So I found him in Australia, and then he went off and would draw and then send it back, and we would collaborate. So that part of it, the actual pulling it down on paper and that collaboration, was about 6 months. But I think what a lot of these guys have probably learned, and what I've learned, is that every part of publishing a book is a process, right? So that just getting it down on paper and then submitting it to the editor is just one part of that process.
We were talking very quickly before we actually started talking on the panel about cover design. Because I know I had certain ideas about my cover. Allison, you had certain ideas about your cover, and it ended up being completely different.
Yeah, I, having never done this before, was asked by my editor to go into a bookstore and take pictures of books that looked like they could be nice. And I thought there would be a lot of collaboration after that. Sent her some different cover designs that I thought would be interesting for us to kind of riff off of. And she went in a direction. She shared with me 6 different designs. I chose one, she chose another, said they did a bit of a focus group at Penguin, and that's the one that they were going to go with. It's like, Okay, so we've had some back and forth and some debate over it, but ultimately that was part of this process that they got to choose.
It is a nice cover.
Ultimately, it was fine.
And you had total control over your cover design.
Yes, total control. We were the client.
Right.
And it's harder to be the client because it's sometimes better just to get a brief and then fill in the blanks. We had a team, a great team. Jane Hope co-founded the agency, sort of was the editor. We had Dave Watson, who is our ECD on design it, who had the idea of hiring the illustrator Gary Taxali, who did a lot of the work. He's a brilliant artist. We also self-published because it was just a lot easier for us to do it. We threw it on Amazon, and we also had it at the MoMA bookstore. But I think one of the things that we had most success with this book is we got requests from clients and from schools to bulk ship, and many times asked us to present. And what's really cool about this book, it's really a philosophy that a lot of us adhere to. So, last week, Dirk Barnhill, I think you're here, Dirk, and Dave made a speech in Washington. Our CEO made a speech in Toronto. Steve just made a speech in Amsterdam. We're talking about doubt, but on their terms. It's not like a recipe. It's a philosophy of thinking, and I think that everybody can take that within Taxi and solve their own problems and not lose their identity, their creative identity in expressing it. So it's been a very successful platform for us. And again, it just keeps reinforcing to everyone who works there what we count on most, which is thinking. And that's the currency that sort of binds every skill set that we have at the agency together, and that being, doubt being the DNA. So it's been very practical.
As a former WPPer, I'm wondering if Martin's read it.
Martin?
You have a forward from him, right?
Yes.
Excellent.
The first thing I did when we signed the contract is ask him to say something. I like what he said. I actually asked if he actually wrote it, and he said he did. Do you think he did it?
Probably.
He said, if this book fails to disturb its readers, its authors will be deeply disappointed. Only the most blinkered traditionalists will fail to benefit. My favorite quote was, of course, we phone our friends for these, it's not that, but anyway. John Hegarty wrote, read this book, you'll love it, and if you can't read, get someone to read it for you.
Scott, how did you get to your cover design?
Well, the cover design is the choice of the publisher, if you go with a publishing house. And when I first started talking with McGraw-Hill, who's the publisher of Uprising, I think in their mind they were thinking, we don't have a Seth Godin type book in our portfolio. So we want a marketer who can write something that's relevant. So the first 5 or 6 designs were all like, I think I saw that, like linchpin, it looks a bit like that. So we had a little bit of a back and forth, and they brought a new designer on who was really terrific, and came back with the current design and this idea of having the bullhorn, which I thought was actually pretty cool and iconic. It was great, and it ended up being this, and then it came back as a final in orange, which was like a dead ringer for linchpin. So I said, I love it, just make it red. So, anyway,
Right.
They did a nice job.
So you were much more of like-mindedness.
Yeah, I think, where it started was really different from where it ended up.
Yeah.
And I think when you work in marketing, at least I have a strong point of view in design, so I wanted it to have a certain look. And in the initial design, it was very hard to read anything. There was no focus on the title.
Right.
So, but that's part of, the creative process when you work with a publisher. And it's a bit like, when you work, I suppose the editor puts the headline on the article, right? It's the same as in publishing. It's like, you can say whatever you want, but don't talk about the cover. That's our space.
Yeah, I don't think I appreciated that. Baratunde, how about you?
So I went through a couple of possibilities, ended up at the one on screen there, but I had a vision for what the cover should be, and then I executed that vision, and it was terrible. What I wanted to do, I thought, okay, what is this book? I got very literal about it. It's like, it's me teaching people about blackness, and I want, let's do it in a schoolroom. So we found in Greenpoint this old Catholic school, which is now an artist studio, has old little pupil desks, and I had this multiracial cast of students that were volunteers from Twitter and Google Plus and Facebook and friends, and I had them I basically racially profiled people so I get a good mix. And then we had me teaching, and it looked like a boring education reform book. It was not fun. It was. And then Harper came back and like, well, you're a comedian. We should have you on like a brick wall with a mic stand and like 2D sort of cutout of you. And I was like Jib Jab? And they're like, yeah, like Jib Jab. I'm like, oh God, no, this is not a wacky book. Like it treads that line between super earnest and serious and ridiculous. And so this is where I tapped a little deeper into what I had learned at The Onion, actually, and the way that place works, it's hilarious because it looks like news. And if it were wacky, like you don't have Comic Sans as the font at The Onion. Well, you should never have it anyway.
Right.
But especially not if you're actually funny. Right. You're just sort of leading the witness too much. So I was like, what about just Helvetica Bold, how to be black? And they drafted it up, and I'm like, yes. It was so obvious. And then the extra twist that I put on it was, let's do 50-50 run. Half white text on black background, half black text on white background, and let people just get confused by that. And so when you order online, you end up with one version or the other. You don't have a say, and so people get really upset. Like, black people get the white version. Like, why do I get the white version?
They can buy a second book then.
Right, it's because you need more whiteness in your life, diversify. And like white people get too excited about the black version. That makes me uncomfortable, makes everybody uncomfortable. So advanced racial profiling technology and cover distribution is a pioneering effort that I'm very proud of. I'm very proud of it. And then the other thing that this was extra, I've self-published 3 other books before this. And then the cover, it's a billboard. And what I underestimate, I'm also a very digital person. I was like, I'll just go straight to Amazon, whatever. For ebooks, it's so cool to see the book cover out there. And for anyone who has it, when they read it in public, it's a conversation immediately. People, why are you reading that? What's going on? You don't already know? Well, you can't be that. So that's what the book's point was to like continue the momentum of this ongoing conversation. And so the book sells that conversation. We have hoodies and t-shirts and mugs too. You're not allowed to put cream in your coffee in the How to Be Black mug.
So you've written more than one book. Are you going to write another one?
Let me enjoy this one. It came out in February. I probably will, but I'm not quite thinking about it that way. There are other stories I want to tell, and I think this book is a window into that story world. It may show up as a documentary. It may show up as a day of hashtag tweets. It may show up on a stage. And so the next story I tell, given how things are shifting so much, how I'm growing, I'm not willing to commit to, I'm going to write another book, but I'm definitely going to tell other big stories. And the book may be one expression or one window into that story world. Yeah.
I kind of felt I didn't want to do any more books after the first one. It felt like such a great relief to get it off my desk.
Yeah.
Scott, what was it like for you? And do you think you've got another one in you?
Oh yeah, I mean, I had a lot of fun on this book. The fun part actually is kind of how do you get the book out there? Because I think the point you were making is, you have this book inside of you and you write it and it takes different forms, but at the end of the day, you have a point of view you're bringing to the world, and how do you bring it out there? So when it was launched, I tried to get it to be sold in Iran. I thought that would be actually a really good idea to get it banned from Iran. My wife immediately said, you're nuts, and didn't want to walk with me anywhere on the street. But no, finding ways of getting the book out there to people is the fun part. And that's something that I think you really need to be good at, because the publishers aren't really great marketers.
That's for sure.
And they are good at what they do. But you need today, to find so many other ways of reaching people.
Yeah.
There's nothing like a fatwa to get your books out.
That's what I thought would be a cool
Nothing like
idea.
a what?
Fatwa.
Yeah, we're not big in Iran.
That's
Yeah.
a big idea.
But
Big idea, but-
that's the most delightful thing, when you've put a message out there and how it's embraced and who embraces it, which you may not have expected, right? I was on a silent car on a train when I found out that FedEx had decided that they want to carry my book in their stores because they want to infuse creativity into the work culture. Being on a silent car when you learn that is painful, right? And I could have never imagined that when I set out to do this. But it's fun. It's very fun. But to your point, it is about how you put yourself out there and how you help carry that message forward.
So do you have another book in you?
I have another book on the shelf waiting to be talked about. And then, yes, it's about how do people embrace it. I'm hoping that people will help me write the next one, but I think there are different iterations of it and different. My book is about helping people find and embrace their own personal creativity, and once they do, I believe that if they're living their creativity, they'll also find their joy. So that's a really important message, and it could be put out in a book or lots of other ways.
Do you think you'll have another book, Paul?
Yeah, I think so because, one of the things that we learn things because we had never done this before, is when on Amazon they have that little feature which is those who read your book like these books. And the books that they liked were porn. No, just kidding. No, the books that they liked were
They package everything with 50 Shades of Grey right now.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. That's the big book now. So no, it was business and creativity, and I think there's a lot of people talking about that, but there's a thirst for people who know that they have to think differently to succeed today. So I think we have a little site where people have contributed stories that have inspired them, and I think we should continue that. The other thing that happened I made about 10 or 12 speeches last year using doubt as the foundation. And what tweeted a lot was one thing, one little section of the book called Make Know Your Bitch, which Dave and Steve presented earlier this morning. And this is about dealing with rejection. If you're really going to be different, and you've dealt with rejection. We've dealt with rejection.
We've all dealt with rejection.
High school was the worst. But the thing is, that's a book in itself. How to sell, how to deal with getting your ideas through a system that may not be, sort of conditioned to accept new things. So I think there's something there. So obviously we're going to do something else. But then the clients get in the way.
Yeah, I know. Baratunde, you mentioned earlier that it was a bit of a surprise, the whole book process writing. It wasn't quite what you thought it was going to be, and you had to kind of focus on that. Were there any other surprises that kind of came up in the process?
Yeah, it's a full-time job marketing it.
Yeah.
And I guess I can't overstate the respect required for the process, and I will just keep using that phrase because I was wrong. And so it was hard to discipline. I had to physically discipline myself. When I get up at this time, I changed my diet to keep my mind as clear as possible. I stopped drinking. I really wanted the top mental shape to be into to like run this marathon. And so when I started to treat it with that level of kind of honor and respect, I got a little further. I think it's the promotion and the marketing and the engagement. It's sort of, I'm used to working hard, but it's just like, it's a lot. And we built a lot of things. We couldn't always even follow through on it. Like Harper was great, especially on the media side. And then I ran with the internet and like on the ground stuff. I'm like, I'm good in a room, put me on Twitter, let's go. So we did a lot of live events. We threw book parties instead of books, talks at stores. And we got liquor sponsorships from Black Grouse and Brooklyn Brewery, Black Chocolate Stouts. It was like an all black everything sort of meme. We asked questions of people, but then once you launch all these initiatives, you have to follow through on them. And so we sent out like just sorties of marketing initiatives and engagement possibilities. And it's like, oh, this shit starts coming back. And you're overwhelmed. And just the hours required to like acknowledge people, to thank folks, to personally ask people to do things. I could have used 3 other bodies on this. I didn't have the funding to do it.
Right.
The publisher wasn't going to provide the funding to do it. So still a lot was left on the table. And I guess the big lesson was I could have the same respect that I kind of had to learn for the writing process was also do the selling and the engagement and the community building process.
Follow through, yeah.
And just to build that time in. Because with a book like this is such a memoir, people feel like they know you too. And like, oh, you remind me of this story that happened to me. And they want to reach out and touch you, and it's fun, but it's like overwhelming. It's really an overwhelming social experience too.
Yeah. Scott, any surprises for you in the process?
Well, I guess one of the surprises was how the book kind of popped up in the most like obscure places. You'd Google set your, for a hit, and you'd get like, huge in like Nigeria. I had like 5 articles in Nigeria. I had like I had a great article in like Ireland. I don't know if it's all places that are bubbling and about to, but those are nice and delightful, even if they're controversial comments or whatever. They're fun to get them like You know, I got a really nice comment in Russian. I don't know what it was. It was like all in all in Greek, but except for the word. of the
Cyrillic
book.
letters.
They blame you for Putin's election. I read
They
it.
were. I think it was like big with students there. You know, like the anti-Putin guys. So that was fun. That's nice.
What about you, Paul?
Well, no, we just realized that maybe we have to think differently about making it. It was tough to do it, honestly. We really needed to isolate people and give them the time to do it properly. But the thing that I was most inspired about was actually some of the stories that came up, and this understanding that just proof that creativity is everywhere, and you find it in the most untraditional places. There's a story about a dad who has a blind kid, and he was fortunate enough to have the money and the means and the know-how to get the kid to learn Braille. The kid was 4 years old. But his kid resisted and rejected Braille. And I found out that half the kids in the world who study Braille reject it as well. And again, most people walk away from that going, this kid's never going to learn to communicate. And this is not a creative director. He's not a writer or painter or musician. He's just a dad, and he's just trying to solve a problem. And, he starts doubting convention, and he goes, well, how can I, what can I do? So he just starts paying attention to his kid, and his kid, one day he spots how much fun he has playing with Legos. The Lego bricks, and they have sort of an embossing to these bricks, and then he creates this Braille with bricks. And the kid who rejected the Braille system learned how to communicate the first year curriculum in 3 weeks.
Wow.
And he's gone on to teach many other languages, music, math. It's an awesome idea, Again, that's the thing, and there's a lot of stories in there of people who just think differently and have the resourcefulness to make it happen. And they're so inspiring. So I learned from the stories.
I think there's a certain amount of process of discovery there, sort of learning new things as you're putting your own books together. What was the most enjoyable, once your book was out, Allison, in the whole process, what's been the most enjoyable aspect of writing it and publishing it?
Probably the reaction, seeing how it is touching people. I mean, we hosted a Step Up event, which is about helping provide professional mentors for inner city youth. And I spoke, and there were women there crying. And it's about, because they're looking for the confidence to put themselves out in the world. And that's what the book's about. It's about giving yourself the confidence and touching and stepping out of your comfort zone just one step at a time, and using your daily activities as a practice ground to do that. And in so many different areas, whether you're in corporate America and you've been established as one thing for so long, or you're 50 years old and you've defined yourself in a certain way for so long, we don't just get to be the same thing forever. And getting ourselves to be able to evolve and be excited by that evolution and embracing the change is a message that so many people can relate to. So being able to connect with people in that way has been really delightful. And the reaction from children is also amazing. Like, suddenly you're an author and you're, wow. It's pretty cool. So I'm a little bit of a celebrity on the schoolyard.
The next J.K. Rowling.
Well, seeing their parents step out and do something different when parents are supposed to be kind of set, I think it's pretty cool. I think it's very cool for them, and I think it's pretty cool for others to see.
Yeah, absolutely. What was the most enjoyable thing for you, Paul, in the whole process?
That's a very good question. I think it's just the notion that it did make a difference. And I've seen proof of that in our work. I've seen proof in that in people sending us emails and coming up to us and saying that that's inspired them. And I just think making a difference is so satisfying. So I would just stop at that.
Okay, Scott?
I think it's sort of the rumor mill, where I live in a small town, and everyone's like, oh, you're a published author. I think I read that book. It's about that girl who kicks the shit out of that guy. And it's a big movie, right? And I'm like, yeah, that's kind of, that's the book. That's the one. No, I think probably my kids and then my mom, and then she was so proud, and so I think that's good. And then
Her friends, too.
her friends, yeah. I get like all her Facebook. Yeah. No, I think that I think it's a personal achievement as well to get something that you can say accomplishment. It's nice.
In the International Congress, Library Congress
That
for
page,
Life.
I think, actually did fill me with great delight.
What was
this,
that?
This
Being in the
page,
International,
this page.
Oh,
that has
yeah,
like
yeah,
and
yeah.
your name on it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's quite.
What is that page?
It's the library, it's...
the International
Congress.
Library of Congress.
I did not get one of those.
You
I'm
must
sure you
have.
did.
You've got
Yeah.
an ISDN
I think it
number.
was
You
racist.
get
It's in your
that.
book. It's in every book.
So what was the most enjoyable
Paul's
thing for you
checking.
guys?
Well, I thought it was that page, but I apparently don't have it.
I love those.
No, there were there were a couple. I mean, the celebrity greatness was I got to meet Terry Gross, and that just like blew my mind. And I was like, she's like, it's great to have him. Like, no, it's great to have you. Like, you don't get to thank me. And then
What does Terry Gross look like? 'Cause you always hear fantastic voice.
So I did they want you to do it remotely, mostly, and I was like, no, I'm coming to Philly. I'm doing this in person. We're doing it live. She is the tiniest person ever. Yeah, she's like this big. Almost broke her by just giving her a hug. I'm like, sorry, NPR, I broke Terry Gross. Like, so she's very light. I didn't like throw her in the air. She's a small person, and she's very gentle, and she sounds just like she does on air. She's very soothing. So how does that make you feel? And you just start crying spontaneously. Best therapy session I ever had. But then, I think I had certain expectations of like, here's what this book is. This is who it's for. This is what it's about. And it's not that I was wrong, it's that it was incomplete. And I've bumped into people, I've read the reviews, I get personal correspondence. Folks find pieces of the book, and not just black people, far from that. Like, folks from around the world, super duper white people, like, find, I don't know what that means. I don't know how you're super duper
what does
white.
that mean?
And wearing chinos, and they're just pale, I don't know. But they would write in and say, I had this experience too. And the sort of how to be-ness of it, which was sort of a theory in the back of my head, became very real through the other stories that people share and sort of project their lives into yours. And say like, thank you for speaking. Your mom reminds me of my mom, or your school situation reminds me of mine. And that's, really, it's sometimes heavy because of what people share from their personal stories, which I didn't ask for.
Yeah.
But it's generally a beautiful, real human connection that I did not anticipate. Yeah.
But you're sharing something of yourself, so
Yeah.
they know you. They feel like they know you, so
Exactly.
therefore you
Gives
should
them
know
permission.
them. And
Yeah.
it totally gives them permission,
Yeah.
and it's wonderful.
So before we close, I'd like to ask if there's any questions from the audience.
I have a question.
Oh, go ahead. Okay. You're not the
You,
audience.
the guy in this. No. What about you, Mary Lee? You wrote a book.
Yeah.
And what was the most important thing about writing that book?
For me, it was really, my book was about CMOs. So it was really about CMOs understanding that things are changing dramatically. And my book was focused on the merge of brand and reputation and what that's doing to the CMO mantra or vision internally. And it was really getting CMOs to kind of sit up and think, well, actually, it's more than just pushing things out now. We really need to think much more carefully about how we communicate with our audiences. And our audiences aren't just perhaps customers and consumers. They're actually far more reaching than that. So that was the big thing. But when I got it off my desk, I was like, woohoo! But like most of you, I didn't realize the amount of time and the marketing effort it takes. But I actually have just been contracted to write a second book. So I'm just about to embark on
I
that
am so
one.
sorry.
Yeah.
There's
But
something
you know
good
what?
about
I
that
think I think for all of us, it's been an enriching exercise. And I never thought I would do another one unless it was fiction, maybe. But now here I am doing another one. So thank you. Questions from the audience? Yes, right there.
As authors, I know there's like a lot to the process. Do you have any, I guess, best practices as far as marketing or dealing with publishers or making sure your vision is communicated on the cover?
Yes. In terms of the marketing stuff, so I came up with a very long plan, super detailed. I hired someone myself to help execute it because it's my book, it's my job, it's my name. So regardless of what the publisher promised, own that, and that's not for every author, I realize that, but if you have any inkling of it in you, turn it up several notches and go. No one's gonna sell your book like you are. You can use I statements, it's your story sometimes, or at least a piece of it. That was one thing. We built a virtual street team to help evangelize the book, and push it out into their communities. And we gave them early copies and provided extra access, answered all their questions. I thought that would help sell the book. It helped sell a little bit. Mostly it gave us a heads up on all the inbound feedback that we received later. So I was super prepped for all the questions that would ever come up a couple of months in advance. And they have really great answers ready for that. And they sort of anticipated some of the memes, people taking pictures of themselves with the book in public. I didn't see that coming. They saw that before. So they were like a beta testing group. So that was super important. And I would say this. I made a deal with a friend of mine who had a book out before me. He said, take care of yourself. You know, like I'm a Virgo, I think I can do everything. I'm a mildly perfectionist person. But I'm no good if I'm sick. If I'm laid up and I'm puking or I'm over drinking or I'm over traveling. And like having some sort of system to maintain yourself once the thing is out so that you can be the author that the world wants to interact with. You don't want to be the asshole that is just sick of touching people and sick of interacting. Like you put yourself out there, you got to kind of follow through on that. But there is a limit, and find out what your limit is and build in stops, build in breaks, because you're useless to yourself, to your book, to your family, to your community if you just burn out too quickly.
Anybody else?
I just think you have to package it. You know, doubt is an interesting concept internally for us, but by giving it a face, this little shit disturber, you know, the subtitle, Unconventional Thinking by the World's Greatest Shit Disturber, I think that's packaged is much more interesting, you know, or challenging with a question, or being part of a movement and going down to the basics. There's something in these books and successful books that package it properly. Just make it interesting for your audience and just little twists. I think it's important.
I mean, sorry, please.
No, I would just say treat it as an exploration, because yes, no one's going to sell it better than you, but somebody once told me, just from a pure basics of writing, be prepared to leave 75 pages on the floor. And so I've put an entire book on the shelf. I simply had a message that I really wanted to move forward, and it's taken a shape that I never would have imagined. But in all of it, I've been very open to the process of how that would come about, and then all of the ways of putting it out there so that people could then embrace it and carry it forward with me.
I did something about 3 months before the book came out, and I asked professors and marketing colleges and so forth if they would submit or contribute a piece to a website called Uprising Movements. And I ended up curating about, 200 or so pieces. And it started becoming like a sustainable marketing campaign because they liked the fact that it was there and they could then send it to their students. So it started, I now have like students joining and participating and basically doing a movement. So the theory was it doesn't really matter what you write about as long as you're following the principles of a movement, and that has worked very well.
It's nice. It keeps the information contemporary as well, which is good. Any questions?
Two back there.
Mine was actually about marketing, or you touched on that, so someone else said that.
Right there? Yes?
I just have a question about self-publishing versus going the traditional route and then being self-published, but I get it was really just initially internal, but just thoughts on that. I know that when you go the traditional route, yes, you get obviously somebody else is paying for it, and you also get distribution, but it sounds like you do a lot of the marketing of it yourself, a lot of the heavy lifting and legwork, and
Yeah.
I think it's going to become more and more the thing to do is self-publish, build it, with grass movement, and take over the whole process.
Well, there's never been a more exciting time to live right now to make something. We were that band Walk Off the Earth. I was talking to the Sony people. They just signed now with Sony, but they just did a series of YouTube videos that were beautiful. The thing is, the other thing that's going good, I knew I had speaking engagements with creative communities, not just in advertising, but in design, because Taxi is very much a design-based agency and interior designers, all that stuff. So I'd take the book up and, of course, talk about it because it's something I think that would benefit the audience. But there were some audiences were small, 200. One was 1,000 people. I mean, we sold books right away. You could tell, and you could tell exactly what they liked and what they didn't like. So that was a little easier for me. But you don't need to. I think it's really, if you have something really important to say, just do it. And there's so many ways. And I love Scott's idea. He took the idea of the book and he shared it with a community who's now sharing it with communities. That's just you got to think about that. So you don't need to go directly with publishers, music agents, all these people. You ask yourself, what do they do? What do they really contribute? Publishers.
Cover. They contribute a cover.
They got the cover, and you want to do the cover, right? You wanted to do your own cover.
I want to do my own cover.
And distribution.
And distribution.
Yeah, I think distribution. We didn't need to scale, so we didn't have the ambitions that maybe that these guys did. But I do think that and then sending parts of the article to Fast Company, and them taking, and then if you read it on Fast, so it just took off by itself, really. But I do believe there was an idea there, and I think that if you do it and you package it right, you come up with some clever ideas. And you just say things like, your book is awesome. I haven't read it, but
Thanks.
Because I'm a racist. But
By the way, he's not just saying that.
hold on.
Inside the flap, it says, if you don't buy this book, you're a racist.
Yeah.
That's my main marketing.
No, I'm not talking about. I'm talking about typography. I hate that typeface.
You're racist against Helvetica?
Helvetica, I can't stand.
Wow,
I'm just
you're
kidding.
a fontist.
I'm just kidding.
Yes.
A fontist.
Yeah, that's a whole new level of hate you just created. It's disturbing.
I'm a fontist.
The only other note,
Enfant terrible of a fontist.
the other note I have on this, I've done it self-publishing before. It was years ago, so it was a different market, and Amazon Directs and all these Amazon singles, they didn't exist. I thought about it for this book, and I opted not to because it would cut out a ton of people who I really think should read this book. And if I self-select for the people I can reach myself or the digital people, I'm leaving a lot on the table. And so having, being able to reach the middle places I can't physically get. Like I know I can reach a certain community, but they probably already kind of agree with me. And they're just, as a first major book, it was good to have that free advertising, basically, like being in book windows and people buying book, they're paying to market that cover. It's not the other way around. The next book, I have to think a little bit more about. Maybe I've achieved enough scale that I can kind of push the envelope. The world keeps moving really fast, so it's not as clear a decision. But the distribution was a major thing because I wanted to make a cultural splash. Yeah.
What do you do? What business are you in? Oh, I'm so sorry. Yeah, well, there you go.
Any other questions out there? Yes.
Hey there. Well, firstly, Baratunde, thank you for teaching how to be black.
You are so welcome.
My question regards to the creative process. Paul, you mentioned doing things for clients versus doing things for yourself. And I'm wondering, how do you balance that on a daily basis, that internal shift when you're creating for clients? There's plenty involved in creating for yourself.
Well, I think the process is pretty much the same. Basically, at the end of the day, a client comes to see you and says, fix this, make this happen. And already you have an important part of the creative process done. I think we love the Einstein quote, which is, if I had 20 days to solve a problem, I'd spend the first 19 days thinking what the question is. But that's a question. At Taxi, we've been able to do the book. We also did clothing for street people, 15 below. Nobody asked us that question. And I found that really, it's a more complicated thing to do, but it's the same process at the end of the day. It's defining the question, defining the problem, putting the right people, not too many people, but the right people on a project and letting them run with it. And it's fantastic. And being a good curator, being a good client, then I became the client. And it's important to inspire them and to keep them focused. And but I don't think there's any real difference between creative processes, whether you're solving a client problem or solving your own, other than you have to ask that question. You have to initiate something.
And carve out the time to do it. Because oftentimes we're committed to every other stakeholder in our lives other than that project that we want to put out there.
I call it weekends and nights.
That's the book of doing, right?
Yeah.
It's the book of doing. It's 20 minutes at Starbucks whenever you have it.
I think we've run out of time now, but thank you very much for being here and joining us, and we'll be around afterwards.
Great. Can we get
Thanks, guys.
a picture of all of us?